There is a rule inside the Spanish royal family that almost nobody talks about. It was not written for the modern age. It was not designed with television cameras or Instagram accounts in mind. It comes from centuries ago, from a time when marriages were treaties and a single wrong match could dissolve a kingdom. And right now, quietly, without a single press release explaining it to the public, this rule is shaping the entire future of Princess Leonor of Spain. To understand it, we have to go back further than Juan Carlos, further than Franco, further even than the founding of modern Spain as we know it. We have to go back to the Bourbons, the family that has sat on and off the Spanish throne since the year 1700, and to a principle they carried with them from France, the idea that royal marriage is never a private matter. It is a matter of state. A future monarch does not simply fall in love and marry. A future monarch asks permission. And if that permission is refused, the price is nothing less than the crown itself. This is not folklore. It is written directly into Spain's living constitution, in Article 57, paragraph 4. The language is almost eerily simple for something with such enormous consequences. It states that if a person with a right to succession marries against the express prohibition of the king and the Cortes Generales, that person is excluded from the line of succession, along with their descendants. Read it slowly. It does not just punish the person who marries. It reaches forward in time and disinherits their children too, children who haven't even been born yet, for a decision they had no part in making. Think about what that actually means for a young woman like Leonor. Most 19 and 20-year-olds navigating first loves, first heartbreaks, first serious relationships get to make mistakes in private. They get to be reckless. They get to choose the wrong person and learn from it quietly, with nobody but their closest friends ever knowing. Leonor does not have that luxury. Somewhere in the back of every relationship she will ever have, there is a legal mechanism that could strip her of her future, and strip that same future from any children she might one day have. The origins of this rule are older than Spain's current constitution, older than the Spanish monarchy's most recent restoration. This kind of marriage consent law traces back through European royal tradition for centuries, part of a broader family of rules historians sometimes group under the idea of dynastic house law. In the era of absolute monarchies, a princess or prince did not marry a person. They married an alliance. A Habsburg married into the Bourbons to seal a peace. A Romanov married into a German house to secure a border. Love, if it existed at all, was expected to arrive after the contract was signed, not before. And so royal houses across the continent built formal consent requirements into their laws, ensuring that no clever suitor and no infatuated heir could accidentally hand a rival power a claim to the throne through marriage alone. Spain's Bourbon dynasty carried this instinct with it everywhere it went. It was there when Philip V first took the Spanish throne in the early 1700s, having been born a French prince. It was there through the turbulence of the 19th century, through republics and restorations, through civil war and dictatorship. And when Spain rebuilt its constitutional monarchy in 1978, the framers didn't discard the old instinct. They didn't decide that this was a relic of a vanished world of arranged alliances and political marriages. They wrote it directly into the founding law of the modern Spanish state, and there it remains today, applying in full to Leonor. This is the part that tends to surprise people. We think of Leonor as thoroughly modern. She was educated partly outside Spain, first in Wales at UWC Atlantic College, then at a military academy, then university. She has been photographed in fatigues, marching alongside cadets, doing pull-ups, learning to fire weapons and navigate terrain like any other officer candidate. She represents, in almost every visible way, a monarchy trying to prove its relevance to a 21st century public that increasingly questions why a hereditary institution should exist at all. And yet beneath that modern image sits a legal architecture that would not feel out of place in the court of Louis XIV. The rule doesn't operate the way people often assume. It is not that Leonor needs permission to date. It is not some medieval chastity requirement policing her private life stage by stage. The trigger point is marriage itself, and more specifically, the moment a marriage becomes a formal, legal reality. Spanish law requires the reigning monarch and the Cortes Generales, Spain's parliament, to expressly approve any marriage of a person in the line of succession. That approval is not automatic, and it is not guaranteed. It is not even primarily about romance. It functions as a check on exactly the kind of scenario the old dynastic laws were built to prevent: a marriage that could embarrass the crown, entangle Spain unexpectedly with a foreign interest, or simply prove unacceptable to the government of the day. If Felipe someday withholds that consent, or if the Cortes refuses to approve a match Leonor wishes to make, the consequence is not a formal objection or a public scolding. The consequence is exclusion. Leonor would lose her place in the line of succession entirely, and so would any children from that marriage. The throne would pass instead to her younger sister, Infanta Sofia. It is a strange kind of power imbalance to sit inside a single family. A father, in his capacity as king, holds formal legal veto power over the marriage of his own daughter, a power that could not simply hurt her feelings but could rewrite the entire trajectory of the Spanish state. There is one telling historical footnote that shows just how seriously this rule is taken, even in living memory. Leonor's own father, King Felipe VI, has a younger sister, Infanta Elena, and another, Infanta Cristina. Neither of their marriages triggered this succession stripping mechanism, because neither of them was heir to the throne at the time of marrying, so the highest stakes version of the rule never had to be tested on them directly. But go back further, to the 20th century, and you find real precedents across European royal houses where marrying without consent meant genuine, lasting exile from the succession. Britain had its own version through the Royal Marriages Act, a law so consequential that a king, Edward VIII, chose to abdicate the throne entirely in 1936 rather than give up the woman he wanted to marry, because the establishment would not accept her as queen. Spain's law is not identical to Britain's old statute, but it comes from the same instinct, the same fear that has haunted royal houses for centuries, that love, left completely unregulated, is a threat to dynastic continuity. Now place Leonor inside that history. She is currently in her early 20s, moving through an intense, multi-year military training program that rotates her through the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, a program designed explicitly to prepare her for eventual accession as queen and to give her hands-on command credibility she will need for the rest of her public life. Her days are structured, supervised, and extraordinarily public. Every uniform she wears is photographed. Every ceremony she attends is analyzed for hidden meaning. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, at some point in the coming years, she will eventually have to navigate falling in love as an adult, knowing that the person she chooses will be evaluated not just by her own judgment, but by a king and a parliament with the legal power to say no. It raises an uncomfortable question that Spanish commentators occasionally circle around but rarely address head-on. What happens if Leonor falls for someone the Spanish government considers unsuitable? Not unsuitable in some outdated aristocratic sense, since Spain, like most European monarchies today, has long since abandoned any formal requirement that a royal spouse come from noble blood. Felipe himself married a commoner, a former journalist, Letizia Ortiz, and that marriage was accepted without incident. The old rule about the bloodline of a bride or groom softened decades ago across nearly every European court that still survives. But approval is still not guaranteed, and the standard for what counts as unsuitable is deliberately left vague in the law itself. A foreign national with complicated political ties. Someone previously married. Someone whose public conduct or private history could generate sustained controversy. Any of these could, in theory, become the basis for withholding consent, and Leonor would have no higher court of appeal beyond her father and the elected chamber of parliament itself. This is why some royal historians describe rules like this one as a kind of secret governor sitting quietly on every young heir's private life, one that rarely needs to be invoked outright because its mere existence shapes behavior long before any formal marriage proposal is ever made. Heirs raised inside these systems tend to internalize the boundaries early. They learn, often without anyone explicitly telling them, which kinds of relationships would create real institutional risk and which would not. It becomes less a law that gets actively enforced and more a kind of permanent background pressure, always present, rarely spoken about out loud. There is also a quieter, more personal dimension to this that is easy to miss if you only think about it as constitutional law. Leonor has spent her entire life under observation. Spanish media has tracked her school years, her time in Wales, her military postings, her public appearances beside her parents, down to the smallest details of expression and posture. Now imagine adding a serious relationship into that mixture. It would not simply be her own decision to fall in love. It would become a national story, dissected in newspapers, weighed by the government, and ultimately subject to a vote of approval by people who are not her family. Very few people on earth carry a version of adulthood where their own heart is, quite literally, subject to a parliamentary process. It is worth pausing here to say plainly that we do not know of any current romantic relationship in Leonor's life that has triggered concern from the palace or the government. This isn't a story about scandal. There is no fiancé waiting in the wings, no secret suitor causing panic in Madrid. What makes this story compelling is not a specific crisis, but the simple, rarely discussed fact that this rule exists at all, silently, for every year of her adult life going forward, whether or not it is ever actually tested. And it may never be tested in the dramatic way history has tested it before. Most modern royal marriages across Europe now sail through consent processes without controversy, largely because heirs, aware of the stakes, tend to choose partners who will not create institutional friction in the first place. Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden, Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark. Before his accession, the future King William of Britain, all navigated similar consent frameworks in their own countries and emerged with marriages the public embraced. The system, in other words, mostly works by shaping choices quietly rather than by dramatically blocking them after the fact. But the fact that a rule usually goes unused does not mean it has stopped mattering. If anything, rules like this one matter most in the moments nobody sees, in the private conversations that never make it to the press, in the relationships that quietly end before they become serious enough to require any formal approval at all. We will likely never know how many times, across the history of European monarchies, a rule almost identical to this one has quietly ended a relationship before the public ever learned it existed. So when we call this an ancient rule Leonor must secretly follow, we don't mean secret in the sense of forbidden knowledge, hidden from historians or lawyers. Anyone can read Article 57 of the Spanish Constitution. It has been publicly available since 1978. We mean secret in the sense that it operates beneath the surface of her public image, unspoken in official statements, absent from the curated photographs of her military training and her ceremonial appearances, and yet fully capable of reshaping the entire future of the Spanish monarchy the moment she falls seriously in love with the wrong person, or perhaps more precisely, with the person a king and a parliament decide is wrong. Leonor will one day become Queen of Spain, if the current constitutional order holds and nothing intervenes before then. When that day comes, she will inherit not just a crown, but the very rule that now constrains her, and she will become the one with the power to apply it to her own children someday. The cycle does not end with her. It simply passes forward, generation after generation, an old dynastic instinct dressed up inside a modern democratic constitution, still quietly deciding, behind the scenes, who gets to marry into the future of a 1,000-year-old crown.